winter basically sucks. You know, you're cold all the time. The ice on the trails makes it nearly impossible to be walking or hiking. It's super dark all the time. And I think one of the funniest parts is we drink hot liquids during this time to try to heat our bodies up. But in reality, the only good thing the hot drinks do for you is end up burning the inside of your mouth. Hot. Too hot. Very much too hot. Human adaptations to the cold are things like putting on more layers, using hand warmers, or becoming a low-grade hoarder watching Netflix, nesting in your bed, becoming warm. Basically, my brain wanted to know the weirdest adaptations that wildlife takes to survive the winter because I'm barely surviving myself, so let's just get into this.
Already.
Adaptations are a part of evolution. They occur so an animal can be more well-suited to live in the environment, and this happens through a process of natural selection. Natural selection is usually known as the strongest survive, but it's actually more along the lines of the most well-suited for the environment that they're currently living in will survive and reproduce offspring, but that's not as catchy as the strongest survive, so we're gonna go with that name. But how do these occur? We're gonna go to upstairs Josh, who's under-caffeinated, and he's gonna explain it to you, and come back down here afterwards. So what is natural selection? Well, the best way to explain it is using a duck in the Naruto universe. Let me explain that a little bit farther. There's a duck in the Naruto universe, and he has to fight to keep surviving, and he doesn't have any of his own traits right now to survive, and he evolves into 1, having a sword, and 2, having a cup of ramen. Now, the cup of ramen can't survive unless it has a duck with a sword around, so when those two breed, it gets this weird ramen sword, but if 2 ducks with a sword meet, you get ducks with a sword. That ramen sword duck, no one wants to breed with because it's a freak of nature at this point, so that means that the sword duck keeps evolving. Natural selection has chosen the sword duck because it's the best for its environment in the time being of a duck in the Naruto universe. Yeah. Alright, let's go. So our 79 years on Earth for the average human, we don't really get to see many of these happening because if this duck lives to 50 years old and so forth, we don't really get to see the major changes as they go. We can see some, like a flower on a mountainside that just changed its colors so it doesn't get picked as much. But we don't really get to see this because if you were to take a timeline from when Earth formed all the way to when it gets swallowed up, our time here will be like the molecule of the speck of dust that's lying on the middle of a football stadium. It just won't be much, which is a late night thought I didn't want to give myself. It's fine. One of the most well-known seasonal adaptations can be seen right from your bedroom window. I'm still getting control of that whole force thing. But we've all seen trees losing their leaves, and that's their seasonal adaptation to be able to conserve energy and everything else by not having leaves on them and having to feed those. So that's their kind of adaptation we all know about. But here's some more weird ones. I'm gonna send you back up to the room, ready? But some adaptations can't even be seen in the winter changes. Some can't even be seen through the eye of IR.
Bravo 6. Going dark.
Polar bear's fur is made up in a way that it won't let out any of the heat. It keeps it all next to the polar bear's body. It doesn't use blubber like something like a seal would because it doesn't spend much time in the water. Rather, it spends most of its time in land, and blubber is good for keeping warm in the water While the fur is much better for keeping warm in the air and the wind and all that, a polar bear can swim, as we've seen, but it spends most of its time above, so it doesn't really need it. The process that the polar bear's fur goes through is called radiative insulation, which is kind of hard to say if you're Josh Retzel talking to a camera and you can't speak, apparently. In the most basic terminology that I can possibly put it, the long guard hairs are what's really good about keeping all that heat in the polar, or on top of the polar bear, to keep it warm. Kind of like if you think about it like the pig in the blanket, like you got the puff pastry out and then you got the pig in the middle, and the puff pastry is kind of like the guard hair keeping it in the, that looks a lot weirder than it's supposed to be. Anyway, go to the next part. Now there's other animals that take a different approach to keeping warm, kind of like the tree losing the leaves, and the exact opposite of staying big and keeping all the heat in. Instead, they stay small, get small, and they become adorable. So let me introduce you to maybe my new favorite animal. I'm not sure yet. This is the pika. Or pika. Greg said it was pika, which sounds, weird because that's a disease. I'm gonna go with pika because of Pikachu. So instead of the pika focusing on keeping its body heat in, it instead has shrinking everything so it doesn't have to expel any of its heat outwards. Shrinking its ears, having basically a non-existent tail, and just having a smaller overall blueprint of him, or footprint, I guess. He's small, so it keeps all the heat in. This way it doesn't have to. Other animals, such as the Arctic fox, even the polar bear, have the similar traits. If you look at their ears, their tails, they're just smaller, so this way they don't have to expel as much heat. Imagine if a person could do this and shrink their body parts, like if they lived in a cold environment, like a non-existent place like Canada, or with Santa Claus in the North Pole. It would look something like this.
Be quiet now. I found myself something very rare. Shh, we don't want to disturb it. Oh, look at this. Shh, the nester. With her stale water, her cheese balls, and endless Netflix. The nester takes the nah, I'm gonna stay at home approach to winter. I'm gonna poke it with a stick.
Last seasonal adaptation I'm going to talk about is probably one of my favorites, just because it reminds me of what humans have been doing during quarantine, which is the beaver during its adaptation, or for its adaptation. Around its dam, underneath the ice, it puts all its food. Kind of like what we've been doing during quarantine, going from the couch to the fridge, back to the couch. These beavers will go from their dams to go get their food outside and then back in. So that's what I have. I'm gonna go finish up this video other places because I'm currently getting blinded by the light. So, deuces. As much as I wish that I could shrink my ears or grow a layer of fur that would keep me warm throughout the winter, I guess right now I'll have to embrace my inner beaver and keep going to the fridge and keep it well stocked. That's all I got this week. Thanks for being curious with me through this week. Tune in next week when I debate an elephant about the current statuses of IPA beers in Australia. Bye.